When the storm will stop and the noise goes down, the lights go up in the middle of town. When the streets are gone and there's no...
Hey friends,
I'm JB,
and I'm Sarah.
and this is the Go Podcast.
When the storm will stop and the noise goes down, the lights...
Hello, everybody in podcast land. We are super excited to be with you today. And this is really cool because we have our first guest.
We do, and we're excited.
Yeah, so I'm JB, and
I'm Sarah.
today we have with us our friend Becca.
Hey, yo.
That was awesome. Way to go. I like that. So Becca, do you want to introduce yourself, or should I give a little?
I
Go
think she
for
should.
it.
No, I think Becca should. I think you should introduce yourself, and then we'll actually tell them the real
Okay.
stuff.
Oh, okay.
So
So
she
you
can
think
lie.
I'm going to lie?
She can
Yes.
lie about herself, and then
Okay.
we'll bring the truth.
My name's Becca, and my undergrad degree is in social work, so I'm a huge psychology nerd. Love looking into research and all that nerdy stuff. And then I am almost done with my master's degree in children, youth, and family ministry. So I'm getting ready to graduate here in about a month and a half, which is a little bit terrifying. But
And awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
super awesome. So Becca is a friend of ours, and she is a small group leader in our high school ministry, and she is a coffee wizard.
She is. Absolutely.
Like, no joke, the coffee she roasts is the best coffee I've ever had.
well, thank you.
So
I absolutely agree. And we've got our family, like, my parents like it, and, well, my mom likes it. My dad doesn't drink coffee,
that's true.
but yeah.
It's
Two
called-
Sparrows Coffee. Do you still roast?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
That
Good to
means
know.
we're terrible friends and customers.
Usually
okay.
we buy around Christmas time, but
Yeah.
I haven't seen it, like,
I know.
Brought in much.
I haven't been pushing it as much since
Okay.
grad school got a little bit crazy. But
gotcha.
Yeah, it's not
if
like
you
you have
could
anything
step
going
it
on.
up to like the LuLaRoe level or
I
the
know,
Roden and
right?
Shields level or whatever
Just
the
start a
essential
pyramid
oils,
scheme with it.
so that I can't forget about it and I see it on social media all the time. That would be great.
excellent. I will
I
work
wonder-
on that.
I wonder how many people we just offended talking about their pyramid schemes.
I'm
Mm.
sorry, we love you, but just don't sell me stuff. Or
Amen.
no, it's fine. You can sell me stuff. You can sell me stuff. But no, okay. If I knew you in high school, I'm sure you're not listening to this. But just in case if you are, don't reach out to me and be like, "Oh my gosh, how are you doing?" And then act like you care, and then try to sell me
This
stuff.
is fantastic and going in a completely different direction than I envisioned.
No, like I tried to be nice to this person, this girl at your softball game on Monday night.
Hopefully
And
she doesn't listen.
I thought she wanted to be my friend, and she just wanted to sell me stuff, and it hurt my feelings.
Yeah, that was pretty funny. Sarah's like, yeah, so I met this girl and was telling me about it, and then she pulls out a business card and
Oh,
shows it to
no.
me. So
That's the worst. I've been there. It's
Yeah.
pretty rough. I'm sorry that
Guys-
happened to you.
guys
How
don't
we
really
got
have to
there.
deal with that. Like, I don't get people selling me stuff too often. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, so we, like always, we record on Sunday nights after our high school ministry gets done. So we just had senior night and invited an 8th grader night, and it was a lot of fun. What do you guys think?
It was a fun night.
It was fun and emotional,
It
but
was.
I cried a couple times.
Why? I don't know why.
I know.
You loser.
Ridiculous.
Jonathan, you were like blubbering, and it was cute, but you were not getting through your words.
I was not, which is part of why I didn't speak tonight. I would not have been able to do that. And I tried to say one thing about one student, and I was like, I'm done. Like, you guys are all great. Way to go. I'm going to miss you. So-
It is one of the best classes we've had.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
I'm
I mean,
not
overall,
disagreeing. I'm just, that's...
There's been
High
a
praise.
lot of really great classes. I'm not saying anything against individuals and other classes. I'm just saying as a whole, they've been really good. And we've had them for a long time. So I think that's part of it.
Yeah.
Because how old were they when we started here
It
at
would have
Central?
been like 5th or 6th graders. So,
Yeah. I still think
6th
they're
grade. They would have been 6th
little like
graders.
that, but
yeah.
they're not.
No,
Yeah,
they're
no.
big kids now.
They're
They're
like
going to go do
adults.
big things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited for that class, and yeah, I'm not gonna start talking about them again because I don't want to cry on the podcast. So
That's my new goal. My new goal on my list is to make you cry on the podcast. Let's do that.
Oh man.
let's
Maybe not tonight, but just in the future.
Okay.
But we got to invite the 8th graders tonight, too. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like a ton of stuff going on. And we also had a mission trip meeting. So
And a parent meeting.
boom, 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 boom. But fantastic evening.
Yeah, it was good. Like, there's a lot going on. Sarah had to stop me and tell me to breathe.
I did.
But I don't know. I felt like it was a good night. Lots of energy, lots of sugar,
Yeah.
pizza. I mean, like, this was like stereotypical youth group night. We
It
had
was.
pizza and coffee and cupcakes and cookies and games, crazy games, and loud music. And so, I don't know. It's one of those come home, kind of feel good, but kind of emotionally drained.
Yeah.
So let's talk about deep stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, wow, Becca,
Great
you are...
segue into this.
Yes, way to go. So, so tonight, today, this afternoon, this evening, whenever you happen to be listening, this is a little bit heavier of a podcast than one we've done before. We decided before we started this, Sarah and I, that we wanted mental health to be a focus of this podcast. And if you pay attention to current events, or if you touch a social media platform in the last week, you would have seen that there was 2 very high-profile suicides that happened in the United States with Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain. And it got lots of chatter going among social media. I think just among people, just talking about. Obviously, it's really sad. It was similar to when Robin Williams took his life a couple years ago. It just generated a lot of conversation. A lot of people just pointing out the importance of mental health and just making sure that we are taking care of ourselves mentally and taking care of others mentally.
I still think there's a lot of confusion around it, which I think suicide is almost unnatural, because we are ingrained to thrive, and so the suicide thought is just really confusing, especially for somebody that's never struggled with depression. So I think that there's an element of what really happened, what really went on. So I think that fuels the discussion about it, which is part of why we wanted to talk more about it today, tonight, tomorrow, whatever.
Yeah. So I think suicide is always a complete shock. Every time I've ever heard, I feel like when somebody dies in a car accident or a sudden sickness or whatever, it's a shock, but I feel like there's a different type of shock with suicide.
I agree.
Why do you guys think that is? Or you can disagree with me.
I would agree. And I think a lot of times we want to rationalize things, and suicide isn't rational. And a lot of the times people will say things like, oh, it's such a selfish act to take your own life. But I don't think that they're being selfish in that situation because they're not in their right mind, if that makes sense. So it's never going to make sense. So it kind of just blows you away when you hear about it because, yeah, it's just, like you said, unnatural.
You can't make sense of it.
Right.
Yeah. A selfish act is typically what suicide would be classified as. So, but I've never thought through it that way. The person in that situation, I think most of the time they're probably trying to think of other people and saying I'm going to make this better for them. Do you guys see that? Or?
Yeah, sometimes. I think it depends. I think there's all different ways into that, if that makes sense. I would say that a lot of times it's hard for us to grieve something that we feel like could have been avoided. And so that's what it seems like to us when we hear suicide. It's well, they made that decision. And so then there's almost a anger, why'd they make that choice? And that's so mean to the people around. And then I think there's also blame thrown to other people, why didn't they check on them? Why didn't they know? And I think that there needs to be a lot more grace in this situation, a lot more prevention if we can get to that. But then, I don't know if we're going to fix it completely. And I wish that we could, but there is darkness. There is this depth that's really hard to get people out of sometimes. And I think the further they walk into it, it's almost harder to pull them out the longer that they've been there. And I read this on Twitter and I thought it was so good. I follow a lot of mental health counselors and just people that are really passionate about that and passionate about it colliding with the church. And they said that suicide is just the final death of a very long internal bleeding. And I was like, wow, I think that's true, because I work with people all the time that are trying really hard to get in a different place, and they don't want to be where they're at, and they're not doing it for attention. They're just really, really struggling. And so I want us to have a gracious response to the person that did it, and to the people around them, to not throw blame. I think, like with the Kate Spade situation, I was like, my mind just wants to land on something, and so I'm running through all the options.
Make sense
and
of it. Like, why did this happen?
What did her husband do? Like, he's probably a jerk. And then I'm like, wait. I have no clue. Calm it down, because I want my mind to land somewhere.
Right. And see, my mind went to the business must have just been too stressful, and that had to be what did it. Right.
And we don't know. We have no idea, and we don't need to know. That's not our business per se.
Yeah, this may not be an answerable question, but I think that led to a good place to ask it. Where does suicide start? Like you mentioned, a long internal bleeding, but I think there has to be a starting point. At some point along the way. So where would you think suicide starts?
Wow.
I
That is
know.
a hard question.
I know.
That makes me feel really good about my question asking.
I think Becca and I are both like, let's do research.
I know, right?
That's kind of Becca and I's nerd hat there.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it just, if you boil it down, it starts with some sort of pain.
Okay.
And whether or not that pain is adequately identified and addressed and healed depends on the outcome.
Yeah, I've had this, one experience where a student said to me, it's got to be an option, the suicide, like if nothing else works out, like I'm going to try a bunch of other stuff, but if nothing else, like at least it gives me an option, a way out. And that was really scary to me and really hard, but I think it's the pain that leads to a lack of hope. And it's kind of like they have so many candles and they keep going out and they keep losing options. So if they've tried getting help from their social support, right, from their family, and then they try to get help with like professional counseling, they try to get medicine, and all those things kind of start not being successful for them, and their hope keeps dwindling. I don't think I'm answering your question really, but I think it's I have this many options. So something kind of sets that off, and it could be, the chemicals in the brain that maybe genetically somebody is more likely to be exposed to depression, and some hard knocks come their way, and that triggers their mind, and the further they walk into that depression, I think there's somewhere in that where it really feels hopeless, their situation, and so that's when that ticks into the suicide thought.
Yeah.
Does that come even close to?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. We mentioned the mental health focus.
Yes.
So do you think all suicide is part of a larger mental illness, or do you think it's split? Like, if you investigated every suicide, like in the NFL, the big talk is concussions. So every time there's a suicide with an former NFL player, they look at their brain, and it seems like more often than not they're finding CTE, which is a brain injury caused by concussions. So they're kind of identifying that and saying, like, I think that's where that comes from. But so in your experience, what do you guys think? Is that mental illness a huge part of the suicide discussion, or is it just kind of like maybe a factor? And then you mentioned pain too. Like, are they both playing a part in this game, or what?
I think what makes that hard to kind of communicate is a lot of people identify or like define mental health differently, and it's hard for people to kind of grasp what it means. or mental illness in general, a lot of people automatically, their mind goes to things like schizophrenia or bipolar or...
Straight jackets, padded walls,
right,
yeah.
like the extremes.
Yep.
And yes, that is part of it and things that, we need to address. But then I'm, like, a huge proponent of, like, mental health is for everyone. Like, I don't know, like, biblically speaking, even Jesus, like, in John 10:10 said that he came so that we can have life abundantly. And, like, to me, that's mental health, is abundant life.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I don't want to go on, like, a preaching tangent.
No, do
good.
it. I was following. I'm like, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because I get where you're going. Though.
Right.
Like, if you've had any conversations with anybody with depression or anxiety, like, I feel like those are, I don't want to, like, downplay it, but more the surface level, like,
Right.
mental illnesses, like, they can't have that abundant life.
Right.
Like, whether they're, like, bedridden because they're just in that state, or they just, like, can't function like they normally could, like, that's not abundance.
I love that thought. And I, like, through working with people, have come to know that people are not really searching for happiness. They're actually searching for peace. And I think peace comes through this mental health idea. So I love that idea of, abundant life. Because when our mind is at peace, we can handle tough things. We can handle great things and stay in a stable level. And I think that's important.
Yeah.
I think it matters. I agree. I think mental health is for everyone.
Yeah.
I would say, as far as, is suicide always attached to mental health? I would say probably. I would say that not everyone that has a concussion that has that same thing commits suicide. That would be my thought, that maybe there's a lack of support in the mental health area after that happens with an athlete or whoever with a concussion. I do think it has to do with the chemicals in our brain, but I think sometimes we can choose it. So, for instance, I think that we can choose negative thinking patterns, and then it walks us into a depression that we cannot get out of on our own, right? So, like, it's not just like, hey, choose joy, which I'm really sensitive about that phrasing, because I know of people that have really honestly tried. They've tried everything. They've tried eating healthier. They've tried exercising. They've tried journaling and all the tricks, and medicine was such a good fix. So I think it can be both. And so I'm very, like, integrative of, yes, there are times where your depressive state or your sad state is kind of your choosing. And then there's times where it's like, this is clinical, this is, severe, this is something that you need help with. And so I don't think the line is really clear. So I think that makes it hard for people that have never wandered into that clinical depression to really understand. They're like, well, yeah, I have hard days too, but then I just tell myself, don't think about it, or don't worry about it, and then I'm better. And I think we could do better at understanding people that are going through those hard things. As far as suicide, though, I think I kind of stand out on the margins with my profession, because I don't think that anyone can take their life without a demonic influence. So that is a big statement for me to say, because I know that that's not agreed with a lot of people. And Becca, I don't know how you feel about it. I'm happy to hear how you feel, but that's kind of what I think. I think it's so dark. I think it is so, like, contrary to our nature as, like, physical humans, and so contrary to our spirit, that there has to be something that, I'm not saying that always for depression, but I think it's a part of suicide.
Becca, thoughts?
Yeah, when you said that, I kind of, like, internally gasped.
Is that something you've heard before?
I've heard the connection between mental illness and, like, demonic influences, and kind
Which
of...
I think there is, like, I think there's examples in the Bible of
there
that.
Are.
But
right.
I'll go ahead and make a bold statement and say I don't think that's every time.
Right.
I mean, I don't.
Yeah. And I would agree. I mean, I can definitely see what you're saying, Sarah, and that, like, it is such in a dark place that it makes sense that there is that spiritual stronghold side of things. So, yeah, I guess I don't have, like, a one answer I don't know.
It's a
so
really
hard.
It's a really tricky one, and it's it's nerve-wracking for me to say that too, because I know it's so different than other people. But I think, at least in my field, it went, okay, all of it is always demonic, right? And the whole phrase of we find the devil under every rock, or it's always Satan's fault, right? And we did talk about we can't blame Satan for our problems. I like that. I want to hold to that. It's his fault. I'm just kidding. But I think we can swing too far the other way and say, oh, it's not a factor. That the spiritual realm is not a factor at all, or maybe very, very, very rare. And we're okay with it being a factor in maybe Africa where there's witch doctors and stuff like that, but not here in America. And
Right.
I think that's just not true.
Yeah. I think you two both are in unique places. Like Sarah, if you're not familiar, Sarah's a mental health counselor, but she's in a faith-based Christian clinic.
Correct.
So she can talk about the spirit realm and talk about Jesus, and
It has to be client-led still, even
Okay.
in my... So if a client comes in and says, I don't want faith to be a part of it, then I respect that, and I'm like, okay, great. Like, we'll work on other things. But obviously when a client comes in and says, hey, like, I want the spiritual component to it, I'm like, awesome, because I have way more to give you and way more to work with you on.
can you like be like, who created everything? And they say God, and you're like, and Jesus is the answer to all of your problems. Is that them bringing? No, that's not how you operate. Okay.
Oh my goodness, no.
Okay.
No.
And then Becca, you, I mean, your degree is going to be in family and youth ministry, and you have a psychology background, and so, I mean, I don't even know what your aspirations are and your hopes, but like you're going to have a faith component to everything that you do as well. But I think as we've been talking, one of you mentioned just like it's unclear, like there's not a good line like on how to like decide these things. Like is there a demonic influence in some of this? Is the depression and suicide, is there a connection there? Like obviously there's probably some connection, but like I don't know, it's just interesting to me like how in faith there's so many times where we want clear, direct answers, but so many times where we don't get those.
Yeah. It's annoying.
Yeah. Do you like having those clear, defined answers?
Yeah, most of the time. I don't stress out as much in the gray areas as some people.
Yeah.
But it is a little bit frustrating. And yeah, something that I've just been wrestling with over the past, like, even year in my own faith is kind of all those gray areas and trying to walk through them, and then adding the component of also having students in the youth group who are asking really tough questions. I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I don't know, mental health and suicide, those are really tough topics, and I definitely agree that sometimes there may be I think there's always a spiritual component to it. I don't know if I would go so far as saying there's always demonic influence to a suicide. I guess my biggest reason for kind of having hesitancy toward that is because I've run into a lot of issues with people in the church just saying, oh, you just need to pray more, or read your Bible more, or you just need to trust God.
Yeah.
And those are just really, like, I've been in dark places where that doesn't help. And I feel horrible saying that because it seems so counterintuitive to our Christian faith. But sometimes you do need medication or something outside of that. And I think that isn't, like, dishonoring God or distrusting God.
Yeah,
Oh,
like
yeah.
you both mentioned medication, and like
I have all these thoughts.
The
Okay.
first thing that comes into my head is like allergies. Like, would you take medicine for your allergies? Well, of course I would, because I want to feel better.
Right.
And
Yeah.
like, so then I think the same thing with depression. I mean, that's kind of the one we're staying at. Like, would you take medication as prescribed by a doctor to get you past, point A, where you need to get past, and then try to move past it? And obviously there's counseling involved.
Right.
But to me, it just seems like a logical connection at this point. But there's still so many in the mental health realm that just are anti-medication.
Right.
Or there's probably some on the other side that's just like, medicate it.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a spectrum of like, just do medicine, it's fine, or just do counseling, or don't even do counseling, but just pray about it kind of idea. And I think that there's a really good balance in there where they've proven with research that the best way for somebody to improve that's struggling with a mental illness is through medication and counseling. And I think that is really important. I like to explain it with dementia. Like, you're not going to yell at somebody that has dementia. They can't remember, right? And there's sometimes where they're okay and sometimes where they're not, and sometimes where they remember and they're trying really hard, and it's really confusing, and you're not going to tell them, hey, choose to remember. Like, you're just not, right?
Wow.
So it does not make any sense to say, like, or hey, just pray about it and maybe your memory will come back. Like, that's not okay to say to someone. Now, it's hard because depression, there are times where it's like, hey, you know what? You need to give your problems to God. You need to get back on the right track. You need to stop sinning, right? Because you're doing stupid stuff that's leading you into these dark places. Like, that's all true too. It's both true. But then there's times where people are struggling with clinical depression, and when you say, hey, like, you just need to trust God more, when that person has spent every night crying in their bed, praying out to God, hey, help me. Like, I'm trying. Like, that is so soul crushing to a person. I get heartbroken. I cry in my office with my people when they tell me that they're trying and that their mom doesn't understand and they just want them to be better, or they think they're making it up. And so like, can Jesus heal dementia? Yeah, he can. He can. I absolutely believe that. He can heal depression without medication and counseling and all of that. But a lot of times he's given us tools to use and medication to use, and we have to stop shaming people for doing it. We have to view it in a different way, or we're going to have people still struggling. And I think so many people are struggling in the pew every Sunday morning, and I think we're behind the game in that and not doing the best we could. I'm so sorry. I'm done.
No,
I love it.
That was good. And it kind of leads us into the next part of it. Becca, I know you're passionate about the church coming alongside in this I don't know, this fight against mental illness. I don't know if that's weird terminology, but like, what are some ways you guys think, Becca, I'll start with you, that the church can be more helpful in this?
One thing that I'm really passionate about is, typically, if you look at evangelical churches, people are going to identify as Republicans. And I'm not going to bring up politics, but I am.
But you just did.
But you just did.
So they're going to identify they're going to identify as Republicans, and their big thing that they fight for is pro-life. But when does that end? Like, when do we quit fighting for life? Does that make sense? Like, we fight for the lives of babies, but are we fighting for the person who is struggling with thoughts of suicide? And I don't know.
That's a unique. I've not heard that. I've heard the death penalty in that conversation. I've not heard that perspective.
Yeah. And yeah, I kind of take in all different perspectives, is that we should value all life. And I was talking with Sarah the other day. Again, I was looking at research. So there's this guy, Matthew Stanford. If you haven't heard of him, go look him up. But he is a psychiatrist, and he's also a Christian, so he kind of looks at where those two fields collide, theology and psychology, which I'm all about. I love it. And he said that the universal church as a whole is missing this divine opportunity, I think is the phrasing that he called it, for addressing mental health and mental illness. And the whole premise behind it is that people who are struggling with mental illness or depression or anxiety, a lot of the times will go to their church, whether it's someone in their small group or a life group or a pastor or a trusted friend, kind of maybe seeking help, or maybe they'll say something kind of offhanded that's a little bit off, and you're like, I don't know, is that person depressed? But even though those people are coming and bringing those issues, and like Sarah said, there's so many people who are struggling with depression in the pews of a church, the church is kind of, I don't know, I feel bad saying it, but like ill-equipped to handle it and respond.
I 100% agree with that. And
Yeah.
I think it was a tweet, maybe you even showed it to me, Sarah, but it was basically saying, pastors, if you're like dealing with somebody with a mental illness with thoughts of suicide, refer them to a professional.
Right.
Like, and that's I do not feel equipped. Like, I talk to Sarah when she comes home from work, and I'm like, I don't know how you do this. Like, I feel like I'm a pretty strong person, but you're dealing with some intense stuff in that field, and
I don't even, if somebody's actively considering suicide, that's when 911 is involved, or a behavioral health center. That's an inpatient thing. So I do outpatient counseling, and I have my associate license, all that. But I'm not going to mess around with that. That's not a, hey, come see me twice a week for an hour kind of setting.
Right,
So
right.
there's levels, and I think that should kind of be how the church views it. And I think some churches do. I worked for a church down in Decatur for a while because their pastors wanted someone to help out in that way. And we have counselors on staff at our church, and I think that's great because there is a lot of education that goes into it. And I also think that pastors are really busy. And so if you're not trained, like, make friends with people who are.
Yeah, even like Troy, he's one of the pastors at our church, and he'll be on the episode at some point, or on the podcast at some point. But he will even talk about, like, I don't really want to get into. Has a master's degree in mental health counseling,
Yep.
and he refers people when it's dealing with mental illness. He refers them to licensed professionals in a clinical setting. Because he just doesn't feel like he's equipped enough to handle that.
Yeah.
And I think that says something, like when people like him, and like when you are saying, Sarah, like, sometimes I just need to pass it along to somebody else. Like, almost like if somebody comes to their family doctor and their leg's broken, like, the family doctor's going to say, you need to go to the ER and let them take x-rays and set it for you and like maybe do surgery. Like, there's different levels, and you have to be able to identify that.
And only provide help in the level that you can.
Right.
And I think that's kind of where we get to of maybe there's times where people will go to the church, and it doesn't always have to be the pastor. It can be, just people in the church. And I would just caution anybody that if there's depression going on, anxiety, and that kind of stuff, to try to take a step back and look at it and say, is this just pretty mild stuff that encouraging them to read their Bible and pray and get into the faith community would be helpful? And maybe that's where you start if they're safe. And then if they're saying, hey, I'm really pushing into this and it's still not getting better, then for it to be okay for them to move on to the next step of, maybe medication and counseling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So talking about lay people, like myself being involved, like, how often do you think people come to other people for help when they're struggling with depression or maybe some other mental illness?
A lot less than they should.
Yeah. Bringing in research again.
love it.
Lifeway, they did a survey. I think it was last year, 2017, and the question was, during the months prior to death, who was aware of the person's struggles or risk of suicide? And they were surveying family members or close acquaintances of people who died by suicide.
So they actually surveyed the people that were close
Right.
to, okay.
And so 42% said that no one that they were aware of knew of the person's struggles. That's a big percent.
Mm-hmm.
And then only 4% said that people in the church were aware of the struggles. So the highest number was family members were aware, and that's 28%. So that just goes to show that, a lot of people aren't reaching out for help.
Yeah, and I think, the high-profile ones that we've talked about, like Robin Williams, like, he's one of the funniest guys that's ever lived. Like Anthony Bourdain, I didn't know, like, much of his stuff, but, like, seeing some of the stuff people have posted, like presidents and chefs and just like all these people, like just a wide range of people are like, I can't believe this guy did that. Like, so these are people getting up and like making people laugh and making people feel great about themselves.
And making very pretty handbags.
And making very, very pretty expensive handbags.
Yep.
And nobody even knows.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really easy to cover up.
Yeah.
It's very, very easy to cover up. And here's the cycle, because it takes more energy to cover it up, and you're already low on energy, low on a mental capacity to be able to like focus and keep up with everything, right? And so then you're adding in all of your energy to fake it. And it is just a downward spiral, right? But so then they don't want to go out because they have to use so much energy to fake that they're happy. And then they isolate themselves more and more and more. Not a good situation. And so that's something that I work with clients is sometimes like we've got to be able to feel how you feel in front of the people that you live with. And if you're really low, you need to show and express that you're low, which is horrible. But what's that do? That creates a crisis in the home, saying this can't go on, right? Like you can't stay in your bed all day. You can't like feel like this all the time, and that pushes the person to get more help, if that makes sense. Rather
it's
than
it's like a check engine light on a car. Like if your check engine light comes on, you may want to ignore it for 100,000 miles, but eventually you're gonna have to go get it checked out. If mom is in bed 5 out of 7 days for 8 hours during the day, like okay, let's have a conversation. Let's see what's going on here.
it's got to be. It has to fix. Like it has to be fixed.
There has to be something done.
So if you, as a listener, are currently feeling depressed or have struggled with that, I would encourage you with safe people to try to actually express how you feel. So, maybe there's times where you have to push through and you go out and you act like you're fine. But then when you get back to the comfort of your own home or, in a very safe community or whoever serves as kind of your family group, that you let them know and just say, hey, like, I don't have any energy left to fake that I'm happy. I just need to lay on the couch for a little bit or whatever. Because when you're authentic and honest with your emotions, one, it helps you feel less isolated, and two, it puts more urgency on the people around you to help you get help.
Yeah.
And just to add to that, I think like on the other side, so people who may not be struggling with depression or anxiety or suicidal thoughts, I think one of the biggest things that we can do to help is giving people permission to not be okay. Because I think that's kind of where a lot of the issues stems, is that there's this expectation that we always have to have everything put together. If you're sad, you just need to put a smile on it and fake it until you make it. And that kind of leads to that spiraling down that you talked about, Sarah. And for people who are struggling with depression, those are your safe people, the ones that are like, hey, I know this is a really hard day, but I'm here for you. And I don't know, I think a lot of the times friends or family members think that they have to have this like exceptional like motivational speech, when really it's just that person needs to know that you love them, you hear them, you see that they're struggling, and you're going to be there to walk through it with them.
I totally agree. And I have been really encouraged to see parents doing this really well. So checking in with their teen that struggled with depression and saying, hey, how you doing? And the teen can be honest. And then they might encourage them to go do something or be distracted. But that person knows, like there's a connection point of saying, yeah, I'm not doing okay today. I don't want to do anything. I'm going to go with you anyways. But like, don't force me to smile. Don't force me to act this way or that way. And I've been really encouraged in seeing that in parents doing that better, where they're just letting their teen feel how they feel. And that's really hard when you're a parent and you're like, because you just came out of these toddler years and the kid years where you're like, this is how you behave and this is how you respond. And so to give enough room for them to express negatively is important.
I love where this is headed. I want to get back to the like kind of the warning signs and what to look for as somebody from the outside. But first, you guys have both talked about isolating yourselves. And Sarah, you gave me a quote or a statistic the other day, and I don't remember the exact statistic, but basically it's an incredible increase in suicide rates in women since the late 1990s. I started thinking about it, and that's kind of when the internet was coming around and starting to be used more, and then social media. I don't know. Do you guys think that there's a connection there between the internet and suicides, or the internet and mental illness, depression? I don't know. Not just women, just in general. I mean, what do you guys think?
It's all you, Becca. Go for it.
Yeah, I think that there would definitely be some sort of correlation. One of the things that like my statistics professor in undergrad always said was that correlation doesn't always equal causation. So I'm not going to say that like social media is the cause of suicide.
Right.
But yeah, I think that there's definitely a correlation in some instances, perhaps most instances, because in my experience, social media brings about this, again, it goes back to expectations. Like, you're always posting the best of the best.
Yep.
Except for the brave people who, like, post the messy things, like Laura.
Laura Miller. I love her. We got to get her on the podcast.
Yes.
Yep, she will be.
Yeah, she did the 30 Days of Real.
Yep.
And I have had so many of my friends talk about that and how awesome it was. Because she went for it, too. She was posting these awesome pictures.
It was fantastic. But that is a rare occurrence for someone to be that real on social media. And I think it just perpetuates, because women, you mentioned women and the higher suicide rates. I think women in general struggle with a need to always have everything put together, and the appearance that we can balance work life, home life, having kids, having a husband, and making everyone happy some magical way.
And, like, not acting like it takes that much effort.
Right. Like, oh, this is so easy, and just have a smile on your face. Like, I don't know. So I can definitely see how social media would affect that. I don't know.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, at least for me, sometimes social media just kind of pacifies my feelings. So if I'm feeling anxious or sad about something, it's really easy to just distract myself with other people's worlds, which is something that I'm really great at. I don't love to, but I'd rather focus on your pain than mine. Like, let's just be honest. I would, which makes counseling a good fit for me. But
I think a lot of people would be in that boat. Like, you don't want to think about your own pain and your own crap and junk in your life, but I'll listen to your stuff. Like,
yeah, and that, I think that's a big part of the journey I've been on this last year in my own life of I've got to stop and feel my own pain, and I think that's making me a better counselor, making me a better mentor to other women and that kind of thing, because I'm stopping and letting myself feel it. But I absolutely know if something happens and I'm just not feeling great about it, if I get on social media and I just like watch Insta stories for however long, it kind of feels numb or it goes away. And so then you could see how that would be a really big problem, right? Yeah. Because the feelings will just get bigger and bigger, and say that the sadness might be because something didn't work out for me, and then I'm looking at other people that it is working out for, and it's just bad. Now, I'm all for social media. You guys know I'm everywhere, I feel like, all the time, and I love it. It can be used for really great things, but we have to be super careful with it.
I think that Insta Story has taken the place of vegging out in front of the TV. Like, I heard somebody on a podcast the other day, they were talking about how they walked in and, like, they're, between their 4 kids and their wife, like, everybody was on their own personal device between laptops and iPads and phones and all that. And he's like, we have a 65-inch TV that nobody had turned on.
Yeah.
Like, they want their personal screen. And I think, in the, 80s and 90s, you would veg out in front of the TV, maybe as a family, watching one family's Hollywood life, whatever that was, like Full House. And they'd have this super sad problem and some music and a hug, and it was over and like dealt with. But then now, like, you flip through Insta Story, you watch 30 different people's Insta stories and how great their life is going right now, and people not being real. We tell that to students all the time. Like be real in small group. Like don't
Right.
share your Instagram life. Like be honest with your friends.
Right.
Tell them, like, that's why I'm such a proponent of happies and crappies. Like happies, yeah, share what's great in your week, but don't just pretend like your crappy didn't happen. Like tell us
Right.
that you got in a fight with your parents.
That's how we start our small group time or our Sunday school time is we have the kids say a happy and a crappy. Just to explain it
Yeah.
in case people aren't in our world. So
Okay, so practical things. What should we, as parents, as friends, youth workers, just anybody, family members, what should we be looking for? What are some warning signs of depression or, I don't know, suicidal thoughts?
Good question. I think there's lots of signs, but I think one of the ones in my experience when I've had friends who are contemplating suicide, obviously they're not going to express it to people that they're not super close to, but they'll start to say things like, I just don't see a way out, or I don't know, it's just
It's like
little
a
comments
Very
like
hopeless.
this.
Yeah, a sense of hopelessness.
And maybe they'll start to disconnect, like Sarah said, start to isolate themselves. You start noticing that they're staying home more instead of going out with friends, or I don't know, not doing as much of the activities that they used to do. Like, say they really enjoyed playing basketball and you kind of notice that they've quit doing that. That's kind of a warning sign. And again, it looks so different in every individual person.
Yeah.
But you know your friends, you know your family members, so if you think something is off, something probably is off.
Yeah.
Irritation is one.
What do you
So-
mean by that?
I just mean like a short fuse in all situations about things that they might not have been irritated about before. And you're like, what is wrong with you? Why are you in a bad mood all the time? That kind of thing. That would be a sign of it. Yeah, lack of interest. So like, I don't want to do anything. I don't want to go anywhere. My friends are stupid. Like, coming up with all of these excuses, that would be a warning sign. Sleeping too much or sleeping too little would be a warning sign. Sometimes weight gain, weight loss can be attached to that. Again, yeah, like Becca said, there's a lot of things. Something I think is interesting is that they found that similar symptoms happen for kids that have depression with kids that have ADHD. So ADHD and depression have similar symptoms just in kids.
Like kids,
So-
like under 13?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
Can
my
kids
assumption.
under 13, this may be another conversation, but experience depression?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That's a genuine question. Like, I've never thought about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they can. Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. One of my professors works specifically with kids, and she said that there was a strong tendency to diagnose with ADHD, and she was finding that it really was more consistent with depression, but the agitation and the restlessness comes out more in the kids with depression than it does even with an adult, right? So depression in kids and depression in adults is different. And adolescents are kind of in the middle there. So I think sometimes you might see them that just have a bad attitude all the time and they don't know how to express.
It's like, relax, you just have a teenager.
And that definitely could be the case. The one that I want to hit for sure, if your student or teenager that you know that you have an active role in is struggling with homosexuality or gender identity issues, I would strongly suggest that you get them into a counselor. Now, I know that sounds bad or discriminatory, like, why do they have to go to a counselor? There's nothing wrong with them, right? Blah, blah. However, we know the challenges that those students face. That's the reality, right? We could hope and dream that it'd be different for them, but that's the reality right now, that they're going to have a hard time at school. They're going to have a hard inner processing, right? Because what they're dealing with is hard to talk about, especially if they're in the Christian community. And that's one of the most isolating. And we know that students growing up in a Christian community that struggle with anything in that ballpark are 8 times more likely to commit suicide. So that's why I'm saying get them to a counselor. Get them to somebody who's in a room that says, hey, I'm not going to tell anybody anything. Here's my exceptions, but you can tell me what's going on. You can talk about your same-sex attraction, and I'm not going to nail you for it, right? Like, I'm going to love you and hear you, and I just want to know where you're at. And counselors are trained to kind of get into that space with them. So get them in. That's my last thing. I think that's an indication that depression could be present.
Yeah, that's a lot. I'll try to compile them and put them into like a list or a document that we'll have in the show notes, because those are really good. So counseling, is it for everybody or just somebody who's sick?
Everyone.
Why?
I think that God has created us to live in community and have that connection and be able to, I don't know, talk about the bad days, talk about the good days. So maybe not everyone goes to a professional counselor, but I think that we need some sort of counsel in our lives. Yeah.
Preach. I totally agree. I don't think it always has to be professional. I think a lot of people can really benefit from it, especially in transitions. We know that transitions are really stressful. So a job change, a marriage, whatever, it's really good to kind of do a check-in. I think that, fitness as far as health is for everyone. I think being mentally well is for everyone. Here's my other thing. I think if we are really going to help people get help, we have to end the stigma that we're too good for counseling. Because if we're too good for counseling and we put that out and we say, oh, well, I'm not that far gone, I don't think I need to go to a counselor, then what we're kind of passing on to other people is that you shouldn't need it. And if you are, then you're in a different category of humanity. And I really think that if we could change that if more people were willing to put themselves in a space where they could get help, and that more people would just try it out so that they could share with someone else what the experience was like, and it wouldn't be so taboo. Don't talk about the fact that you go to counseling. Then more people would be in that pathway to get help.
Cool.
I agree.
Good stuff. I found, seems like youth pastors that I know out in California, they'll talk about their counseling and yeah, my counselor, and it's they're fitness trainer. It's a cool thing. But here, you don't talk about it. It's, I don't know anybody just off the top of my head that would yeah, my counselor. I talked to my counselor the other day.
Right.
I don't know. It's
very hush-hush where, in the bigger cities, it's kind of glorified, yeah, my therapist or my counselor, and here it's
Do people call it a shrink anymore? Where'd that come from? That's a weird term.
I have no idea.
I don't even know.
No. I don't know.
We don't use it.
Okay.
We don't use that term.
All right.
But yeah, here's two just additional things. One, there's something called Soul Medics with Remedy Life. It is a 24-hour chat service that they have trained people that can talk with you. So if you are feeling depressed and you don't know how to communicate that with the people around you, I don't think it's the end-all be-all, but I think it's a really good start for you to start having that discussion and talking with somebody that it's anonymous, it's confidential, and could be very, very helpful. There's also a suicide helpline that's important for you to know. We were going to put that in the show notes.
I'll put it in the show notes, but you can text the word remedy, REMEDY, to the number 494949, and that'll set you up with a chat with a real person who is trained that will talk to you. And then the National Suicide Prevention Hotline is 1-800-273-8255.
Yeah. So here's our pitch to you. Go help someone. Go do a check-in with someone. If you see any signs that we've talked about, just kind of open the conversation up and check on them. And then if you are having depression or suicidal thoughts, go get help.
When the storm